Before we share this extraordinary story about hidden sacrifice, unconditional love, and the profound choices people make to protect children who need them most, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. What you are about to witness represents one of the most unexpected and emotionally complex moments ever captured on television, a revelation that challenged assumptions about family, identity, and the lengths to which some people will go to ensure a child's safety and well-being. Throughout human history, families have been shaped by circumstances that required unconventional arrangements, difficult choices, and sacrifices that often remained hidden from public view to protect those involved. The story of what occurred during a Family Feud taping in August 2024 demonstrates how carefully guarded family secrets can carry both profound love and complex consequences, how public platforms can become spaces where long-held truths finally emerge, and how one elderly man's decision to reveal information he had protected for decades would create a moment of such unexpected emotional impact that it would stop a television production and force everyone present to reconsider their assumptions about the family they thought they had been observing. What 85-year-old William Chen revealed to Steve Harvey and the assembled audience would transform understanding of his family's history and illuminate the extraordinary measures that previous generations sometimes took to protect children from circumstances that threatened their safety and future. William Chen was 85 years old when he appeared on Family Feud, representing his family from San Francisco, California. He presented as a dignified elderly man whose advanced age had not diminished his mental clarity or his evident strength of presence. William had immigrated to the United States from Taiwan in 1962 at age 23, arriving with limited English proficiency but substantial determination to build a better life than the one available to him in his country of origin. He had worked initially in restaurant kitchens and garment factories, taking any employment available while learning English and saving money with remarkable discipline. Within a decade of his arrival, William had saved enough to purchase a small grocery store in San Francisco's Chinatown, which he operated successfully for 35 years before retiring and passing the business to the next generation. William had married his wife Lynn in 1965, 3 years after his arrival in the United States. Lynn had also immigrated from Taiwan and shared William's values regarding hard work, education, and family obligation. Together, they had built a life characterized by financial stability, achieved through extraordinary effort, deep investment in their children's education and opportunities, and maintenance of cultural traditions that connected them to their heritage while also embracing their adopted country. William and Lynn had raised what everyone understood to be their 3 children: David, born in 1967, Michael, born in 1970, and Susan, born in 1975. The children had all received excellent educations, established successful professional careers, and had families of their own, creating the multi-generational household structure that would eventually lead to their Family Feud appearance. The Family Feud application had been submitted by David, William's eldest son, who was now 57 years old and worked as a software engineer in Silicon Valley. David had thought that appearing on Family Feud would be an enjoyable experience for his aging father and an opportunity to create positive memories involving multiple generations of their family. The application had described their immigrant family story, William's age, and remarkable continued vitality, and the strong family bonds that had sustained them across decades and across the cultural navigation required of immigrant families. The producers had selected the Chen family specifically because they represented the kind of multi-generational immigrant success story that reflected important dimensions of American experience. What no one outside the immediate family knew, and what most of the extended family members did not fully understand, was that the family structure they presented to the world was not entirely as it appeared. Susan, the youngest of the 3 children, was not biologically William and Lynn's daughter. She was actually their granddaughter, the biological child of their son Michael, born when Michael was only 15 years old to a girlfriend who was 14 at the time. The circumstances of Susan's conception and birth had created a family crisis that required immediate decisions about how to protect all the young people involved and how to provide Susan with the stable family environment that a newborn required. The decision made by William and Lynn in 1975 had been extraordinary in its sacrifice and its implications. When Michael's girlfriend became pregnant, and both sets of teenagers' parents recognized that neither young person was prepared to raise a child, William and Lynn had made the choice to raise Susan as their own daughter, rather than pursuing adoption by strangers or allowing her to enter the foster care system. However, this decision came with a complex dimension that reflected both the cultural context of their immigrant community and their assessment of what would provide Susan with the best possible life circumstances. William and Lynn decided that they would present Susan publicly as their biological daughter rather than as their granddaughter, effectively erasing the reality of her biological parentage from public knowledge and from most family understanding. This decision had been made for several interconnected reasons that reflected both protective instinct and pragmatic assessment of social realities. William and Lynn believed that Susan would face less stigma and fewer questions if she was understood to be their daughter rather than a child born to teenage parents. They wanted to protect Michael from having his young life defined by teenage parenthood and wanted to give him the opportunity to complete his education and build his career without the responsibility of raising a child for which he was entirely unprepared. They wanted to protect the young mother, whose family had requested minimal ongoing connection to avoid social stigma in their own community. Most fundamentally, William and Lynn wanted Susan to grow up without the psychological burden of knowing she had been born to parents who could not or would not raise her, believing that being raised as their daughter would provide her with greater security and sense of belonging than being raised with full knowledge of her biological origins. The decision to maintain this family secret had required sustained effort and careful management across decades. Official documentation including Susan's birth certificate listed William and Lynn as her parents, an arrangement facilitated through means that were not entirely transparent, but that had been possible given the time period and the specific circumstances. Extended family members had been told that Lynn had unexpectedly become pregnant later in life, a story that was accepted without extensive questioning, given that such occurrences, while uncommon, were not impossible. Michael had been informed that he would be Susan's brother rather than her father in all public and family contexts, and he had accepted this arrangement as the price of being allowed to continue his own adolescence and education without the disruption that teenage parenthood would create. Susan had grown up believing William and Lynn were her parents, and Michael was her older brother. She had enjoyed a stable childhood characterized by the same strong emphasis on education, cultural connection, and family obligation that had shaped David and Michael's upbringing. Susan had excelled academically, attended university, and established a career as a physical therapist. She had married and had 2 children of her own, making William and Lynn great-grandparents, though everyone understood them as grandparents. Susan's life had unfolded without apparent psychological harm from the deception about her origins, and William and Lynn had believed that their decision to conceal the truth had been vindicated by Susan's healthy development and successful adult life. However, as William entered his 9th decade of life and began contemplating his mortality with the clarity that advanced age often brings, he had begun to question whether maintaining the deception had been the right choice. Lynn had passed away 3 years earlier, taking with her half of the shared burden of the secret and leaving William as the sole keeper of information that felt increasingly heavy as his remaining time grew shorter. William had begun to feel that Susan deserved to know the truth about her biological origins before he died, both because she had a right to this information about her own identity and because he feared that if he died without revealing the truth, the information might emerge in more harmful ways after his death through estate matters, genetic testing, or family conflicts that might expose the deception without appropriate context or support. William had discussed his concerns with David and Michael, the two people besides Lynn who had known the full truth throughout Susan's life. David, who had been 8 years old when Susan was born and had understood the family secret from relatively early in his development, supported William's inclination to reveal the truth, but worried about how Susan would respond to learning that her entire understanding of her family structure had been based on deception. Michael, Susan's biological father, had complex feelings about potential revelation. He had lived for 50 years as Susan's brother rather than her father, and while he had provided support and care consistent with brotherly obligation, he had never developed the psychological identity of being her parent. Michael worried that revelation would disrupt his relationship with Susan and create expectations or emotional dynamics that he was not equipped to navigate after decades of relating to her as a sibling. The decision about if and how to reveal the truth to Susan had remained unresolved in the months leading up to the Family Feud taping. William had been inclined to tell Susan directly in private family context, but he struggled with finding the right moment and the right approach. The Family Feud appearance had initially seemed entirely separate from these concerns, simply an enjoyable family activity. However, during the preparation and travel to Los Angeles for the taping, William had experienced a growing conviction that the public platform might actually provide an appropriate context for revelation. He believed that having extended family present, being in a supportive environment with professional facilitation, and creating a documented moment might actually be preferable to attempting revelation in purely private context where there would be no witness to the conversation and no support structure beyond immediate family. William made the decision to reveal the truth during the Family Feud taping without informing other family members in advance of his specific intention. He believed that if he told David and Michael what he planned to do, they would attempt to dissuade him or would create enough anxiety that he might lose his courage to proceed. William had lived 85 years and had survived circumstances that most people never faced, and he believed he had earned the right to make this decision according to his own judgment about what was necessary and appropriate. He carried with him to the studio a deep conviction that Susan deserved truth, that secrets maintained too long created their own harm, and that whatever difficult emotions emerged from revelation would ultimately be preferable to continued deception. The taping began with standard Family Feud format and introductions. Steve Harvey approached the Chen family with his characteristic warmth and conducted the usual pre-game conversation, learning about family members and their backgrounds. William, as the eldest family member and patriarch, received particular attention and respect from Steve, who asked about his immigration story, his success in building a business, and his evident pride in his multi-generational family. Susan stood beside William during the introductions, and Steve commented on what appeared to be the close bond between father and daughter, noting the evident affection between them as Susan kept a supportive hand on William's arm to steady him. The Chen family competed through the main game against another family, performing adequately, though William's advanced age limited his quick response capabilities. The family dynamic appeared warm and mutually supportive, with younger family members deferring respectfully to William while also providing assistance when his slower processing speed or hearing difficulties created challenges. Susan was particularly attentive to William's needs, positioning herself near him to help him hear questions and providing physical support when movement was required. To observers, they appeared to be a loving father-daughter pair with the kind of close bond that sometimes develops when age gaps are significant and when adult children care for elderly parents with tenderness and respect. After the Chen family won the main game and prepared for fast money, Steve Harvey engaged in his customary conversation before the round began. He asked various family members about what winning the prize money would mean to them and what they might do with the winnings. When Steve asked William this question, the elderly man paused for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted in a way that made Steve instinctively recognize that something significant was about to occur. William asked whether he could say something important before they proceeded with fast money, and Steve, with the intuition developed through years of live television, immediately agreed and instructed the production team to give William whatever time he needed. William turned to face Susan directly, taking both of her hands in his own. He began speaking in a voice that carried the weight of decades of held information finally being released. He told Susan that he loved her more than he could possibly express, and that everything he was about to say came from a place of profound love and protective instinct. He said that he needed to tell her something he should have told her years ago, but had lacked the courage to reveal. The studio had fallen completely silent, the audience and production crew recognizing that something unexpected and significant was unfolding. Susan's expression showed confusion mixed with growing concern as she tried to understand what her father was preparing to tell her. William revealed the truth with direct simplicity. He told Susan that he was not her biological father, but rather her biological grandfather. He explained that Lynn had not been her biological mother, but rather her biological grandmother. He told her that Michael was not her brother, but rather her biological father, that she had been born when Michael was 15 years old to a mother who had been 14, and that he and Lynn had made the decision to raise her as their daughter rather than allowing her to be adopted by strangers or to grow up knowing she had been born to parents who could not care for her. William's voice broke as he spoke, tears streaming down his aged face as he released information that he had carried for 50 years and that had grown heavier with each passing year. The revelation created a moment of suspended shock throughout the studio. Susan stood frozen, her hands still held in William's grasp, her face showing an expression of absolute incomprehension as her brain attempted to process information that fundamentally restructured her understanding of her identity and family. Steve Harvey's mouth fell open in genuine shock, his professional composure completely abandoned as he processed what he had just heard. The audience sat in stunned silence, uncertain how to respond to a revelation that carried such profound implications and that had clearly been unknown to the person most affected. The production crew stood motionless, cameras continuing to record, but all human activity suspended as everyone present tried to understand what was happening. Susan pulled her hands away from William's grasp and took a step backward, her expression shifting from confusion to something that looked like betrayal and disbelief. She looked at Michael, who stood several feet away with tears running down his face and an expression that combined guilt, grief, and something that might have been relief that the secret was finally revealed. Susan's voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper as she asked whether what William had just said was true. Michael nodded, unable to speak, and Susan's legs seemed to give out beneath her as the full reality of what she had just learned crashed through her consciousness. Steve Harvey moved immediately to help support her, guiding her to a chair that production staff quickly provided. The studio remained frozen in the aftermath of the revelation, no one certain what should happen next or how to proceed. Steve Harvey knelt beside Susan, speaking quietly to her and asking whether she needed medical attention or whether there was anything that could be done to help her. Susan shook her head, her face buried in her hands, her body shaking as she processed emotions that were clearly overwhelming. David, Susan's biological uncle, though she had grown up believing he was her brother, approached and placed a hand on her shoulder, his own face showing the complex emotions of someone who had known the truth his entire adult life and had watched his sister live without this knowledge. Steve Harvey made a decision to stop the taping entirely, instructing the production team to clear the studio of everyone except the Chen family and essential personnel. He recognized that what was occurring was far beyond the scope of a game show, and that the family needed privacy and space to process the revelation and its implications. Steve told the Chen family that they could take whatever time they needed, that the prize money would be theirs regardless of whether they completed fast money, and that the production would provide access to professional counseling support if they wanted it. He expressed genuine concern for Susan's well-being and acknowledged that what William had revealed created circumstances that required careful handling rather than continued television production. The immediate aftermath of the revelation involved private family conversation facilitated by production staff who had training in crisis intervention and by mental health professionals who were brought to the studio to provide support. Susan asked questions about the circumstances of her birth, about why the decision to conceal the truth had been made, and about who else had known throughout her life. William answered with painful honesty, explaining the reasoning that had motivated the decision and acknowledging that regardless of intentions, the deception had denied Susan information about her own identity that she had a right to possess. Michael spoke to Susan for the first time as her biological father rather than as her brother, explaining his own youth at the time of her birth and his complete lack of capacity to serve as her parent at age 15. The question of whether the episode would ever air became a subject of extensive discussion involving the Chen family, the production company, legal advisors, and ethics consultants. The production company recognized that airing footage of such a private and painful family revelation raised significant ethical questions about exploitation and consent. However, William and eventually Susan both expressed a view that the revelation should be shared publicly. William believed that other families might be maintaining similar secrets that created harm through continued deception, and he hoped that seeing the consequences of his revelation might encourage others to consider whether their own family secrets should be revealed while there was still time to process them with appropriate support. Susan, after several weeks of processing, expressed a similar view that her experience might provide valuable perspective for others facing questions about family secrets, adoption disclosure, or complex family structures. The episode that eventually aired months later included extensive footage of the revelation and its immediate aftermath, edited carefully with input from trauma specialists and with Susan's explicit consent for each element of content that was included. The production team created extensive contextual material that was interwoven with the revelation footage, providing expert commentary about adoption, family secrets, identity formation, and the complex ethics of deception motivated by protective instinct. The episode included follow-up interviews with the Chen family conducted several months after the original taping, providing perspective on how they were processing the revelation and its implications. The response when the episode finally aired was extraordinary in both volume and complexity. Millions of viewers watched the revelation unfold, and the subsequent public discussion reflected profound disagreement about whether William's choices had been right or wrong, whether his method of revelation had been appropriate, and whether the Chen family's decision to allow the content to air had been wise or exploitative. Mental health professionals debated the psychological impacts of both the original deception and the revelation, with some arguing that Susan had been protected by the arrangement, while others contended that she had been denied fundamental information about her identity that she had a right to possess from much earlier in her development. Adoption advocates and organizations working with families formed through unconventional arrangements noted that the Chen family's situation, while dramatic in its television revelation, reflected issues that many families navigated with varying levels of openness and honesty. The visibility of the Chen family's experience created increased public discussion about when and how children should be told about their biological origins, about the ethics of kinship adoption arrangements, and about the long-term psychological impacts of family secrets maintained across decades. Research psychologists studying identity formation and family dynamics noted that the Chen case would likely become an important reference point in ongoing scholarly discussion about these issues. Susan's personal processing of the revelation involved extensive therapeutic support and required fundamental reconstruction of her understanding of her identity and family relationships. She described feeling betrayed by the decades of deception while simultaneously recognizing the love and protective instinct that had motivated it. She struggled with anger toward William and Michael for maintaining the secret while also grieving the loss of Lynn, who had been both her grandmother and the woman she had believed was her mother, without having the opportunity to process the truth with her before her death. Susan's relationship with Michael became particularly complex as they attempted to navigate a new understanding of their connection after 50 years of relating as siblings, recognizing that they could not simply transform overnight into parent and child, but also could not return to the sibling relationship now that truth had been revealed. The relationship between Susan and her own children became another dimension of complexity, as she had to explain to them that their family structure was different from what they had understood, that the great-grandfather they had known was actually their great-great-grandfather, and that their Uncle Michael was actually their biological grandfather. The revelation rippled through the extended family structure, requiring everyone to adjust their understanding of relationships and to process complex emotions about the deception that had shaped their family for 5 decades. 1 year after the revelation on Family Feud, the Chen family participated in a follow-up documentary that explored the long-term impacts of William's decision to reveal the truth and the family's ongoing process of adjustment. William, now 86 years old, expressed no regret about having revealed the truth despite the pain it had caused. He said that carrying the secret had become increasingly burdensome as he aged, and that he believed Susan deserved to know the truth, regardless of the disruption it created. He acknowledged that his method of revelation had been imperfect, and that private disclosure might have been preferable to public television revelation, but he maintained that the truth itself needed to be told, and that he was grateful to have done so while he was still living and capable of answering Susan's questions. Susan spoke about her continued processing of the revelation and described herself as still working to integrate the new information into her understanding of herself and her family. She said that learning the truth had been devastating, but that she also recognized elements of relief in finally understanding certain aspects of family dynamics that had never quite made sense when viewed through the lens of the deceptive narrative. She described her relationship with William as having survived the revelation, though transformed by it, and she expressed gratitude that he had chosen to tell her the truth, rather than allowing her to potentially learn it after his death, when she would have no opportunity to discuss it with him. Michael's experience of the revelation was perhaps the most complex of any family member. For 50 years, he had lived as Susan's brother, having no practical experience or psychological preparation for suddenly being identified as her father. He described struggling with profound guilt about the deception, while also recognizing that as a 15-year-old boy, he had not been the primary decision-maker about how Susan's birth would be handled. Michael and Susan began meeting regularly with a therapist to process their changed relationship, working to build some form of connection that acknowledged biological reality while also respecting the 5 decades of sibling relationship that had preceded the revelation. 3 years after the revelation, William Chen passed away at age 88. His death came peacefully and was preceded by several months, during which he was able to have extensive conversations with Susan about her childhood, about his decision-making regarding her origins, and about his hopes for her future. Susan later described these final conversations as having provided crucial healing and closure, allowing her to process her complex feelings while William was still present to hear them and respond. At William's funeral, Susan delivered a eulogy that acknowledged both the pain of the deception and the profound love that had motivated it, describing William as having been a father to her in every meaningful sense, regardless of biological technicalities, and expressing gratitude that he had found the courage to tell her the truth before he died. The long-term impact of the Chen family story extended beyond their individual family to influence broader discussions about family secrets, adoption disclosure, and the ethics of deception motivated by protective instinct. Mental health organizations developed new guidance about disclosure of complex family origins, emphasizing that while specific circumstances varied, general principles suggested that earlier rather than later disclosure tended to produce better long-term outcomes. Legal scholars examined the case in discussions about the ethics and legality of falsifying birth documentation, noting that while William and Lynn's actions had been motivated by love, they had also involved documentation fraud that created potential legal complications. The story also influenced how families formed through kinship adoption or similar arrangements thought about disclosure and honesty. Many families reached out to express that the Chen family's experience had motivated them to reconsider their own approach to family secrets and had encouraged them to pursue greater transparency with children about their biological origins before circumstances forced revelation in potentially more traumatic ways. Adoption support organizations noted increased requests for guidance about disclosure timing and methodology following the airing of the Chen family's story. 10 years after William Chen stood on the Family Feud stage and revealed the secret he had carried for 5 decades, the family had achieved a new equilibrium that incorporated truth while honoring the decades of relationship that had been built on the original deceptive foundation. Susan had integrated her biological origins into her identity while maintaining her understanding that William and Lynn had been her parents in every functional sense, regardless of genetic technicalities. Her relationship with Michael had evolved into something unique that was neither traditional parent-child connection nor simple sibling relationship, but rather a hybrid that acknowledged their biological connection while respecting the history of their brotherhood. The family gathered annually to honor William and Lynn's memory, recognizing them as the foundational figures whose choices, however complex and imperfect, had been motivated by love and protective instinct. The story of what happened when the studio froze as an 85-year-old grandfather revealed who he had really raised in secret ultimately transcended its origin as a shocking television moment to become a complex meditation on family, truth, identity, and the difficult choices that people make when trying to protect children from circumstances beyond their control. It demonstrated that family secrets carried costs regardless of the motivations behind them, and that revelation, while painful, often provided necessary foundation for authentic relationship. It illustrated that love and deception could coexist within the same actions, and that evaluating past choices required holding multiple truths simultaneously without reducing complex situations to simple judgments about right and wrong. For the millions of people who watched William Chen's revelation or learned about the Chen family story through subsequent coverage, the experience provided both shock and invitation to reflection. It challenged viewers to consider the family secrets that might exist within their own families and to evaluate whether maintaining those secrets served protective functions or created harm through denial of truth. It prompted discussion about when deception motivated by love was justified and when it crossed into violation of fundamental rights to know one's own origins. The complexity of the Chen family's experience honored the reality that these questions rarely had simple answers, and that individual circumstances required nuanced evaluation rather than application of universal rules. If this story has caused you to reflect on the nature of family secrets, the right to know one's biological origins, and the complex relationship between protective deception and harmful denial of truth, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with others who might benefit from considering how their own family structures have been shaped by decisions made by previous generations, and whether secrets maintained across decades serve continued protective functions or create harm that revelation might address. The Chen family's experience reminds us that truth, while potentially painful in the moment of revelation, often provides necessary foundation for authentic relationship, and that secrets maintained too long create burdens that grow heavier rather than lighter with the passage of time.